Why do I stand up here? Anybody?
To feel taller.
No. Thank you for playing, Mr. Dalton. I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. You don't believe me? Come see for yourselves. Come on. Come on. Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. Even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try. Now, when you read, don't just consider what the author thinks. Consider what you think. Boys, you must strive to find your own voice. Because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all. Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Don't be resigned to that. Break out. Don't just walk off the edge like lemmings. Look around you.
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. What is up, Successful Dropouts? And welcome to episode 30 of Successful Dropout. I mean, 30 is not like the hugest mile marker, you know, but it's kind of cool. So for this episode, I wanted to do something a little different. And instead of a regular interview with a dropout this week, I decided to have more of a group conversation format. So I got a very good, very old friend of mine. He's not very old. We've just been friends for a long time. Named Stephen Olmon on the phone, and also my brother-in-law, Auren O'Connell. Now, both these guys, they're young, but they're very successful for their age, and both of them went to college. And it was actually Stephen's idea. He Facebook messaged me one day and said, I would like to have a conversation on your podcast about my experience going to college. Because this guy, he went to a 4-year college, and he's very successful now. He paid off all his debt, and he's making, I think he said over 6 figures or in the 6 figures a year. And I said, that sounds awesome. So we went ahead and did it. So in this conversation, you'll hear myself, you'll hear Stephen Olmon, who by day is a management consultant at a large firm. And by night, he is an entrepreneur, and he's got a couple different cool projects that we'll get into. So he's a great person to get just both sides of the story on what it's like. He's got that entrepreneurial mindset. And then he also, finished college, got his degree, and he's working a full-time job there. And then we have my brother-in-law, Auren O'Connell. This guy's phenomenal. He is a psychiatric nurse practitioner. He got his doctorates from, I believe it was Washington State University. And he is able to earn 6 figures a year. And of course, he has college debt that he is in the process of paying off. And so the three of us just kind of got together and had a conversation about college in general, about entrepreneurship, and about the kind of pros and cons of each. So I think this would be very interesting for you guys to listen to and just get kind of a different perspective from the people that we usually have on the show, who are usually really gung-ho about, drop out, do the entrepreneurship thing. And these guys are too, but with that added perspective of what it's like actually being successful through earning a college degree. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Again, thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. Conversation about that. But I was going to share like a funny memory, Stephen, because I remember when you used to come to the cabin all the time, like one of the main things I remember is how awestruck you were at seeing the mountains. Because you came from Texas and everything was flat. And I remember you had your face like plastered up against the window, and you're just like, Mom, Dad, look how big that mountain is. That's huge. And it's like, it's this tiny little hill to me. I'm like, oh, you want to see some big mountains, there's not even snow on top of that one. But you were just awestruck. And I remember it just gave me like a whole new appreciation for the mountains. I was like, yeah, that is a lot of dirt and rock just piled up there,
Yeah, I from Texas, not much beauty, and going up there to the Northwest was fun, and it was a totally different world. And I mean, you'd like hike along, you'd climb up on the side of waterfalls, and I thought I was going to die, and just I'm trying to follow you, just falling behind, and So that really opened up my worldview and perspective some, being up there, just totally different.
Yeah, I remember that really well. But one thing I will say about Texas, though, because I lived down there when we saw each other last year, when I had the job down there, lived down there for like 3 months, and I like the people, except for when I'm driving with them. Traffic was insane. That's mainly what
we say drive with a purpose around here. So.
Okay, well, that's a nice way to put it, yeah. But as far as the people are concerned, I think, like, it's the kind of people I think listen to this show, just like really gung-ho, like can take on the world, self-directed, extreme ownership kind of mindset Texans. And I've always liked that about Texas. So let's get into this conversation. Let's start with you, Stephen. Give us kind of an overview of your college experience and what you studied and where you're at now. And I've talked to Auren about this too. I'd love you guys to share as many numbers as you're comfortable with, as far as like how much you went into debt, how much you earn now, how long it's going to take you to pay off your student loans. I think that's important for people to hear if you feel comfortable with it. So let's start with you, Stephen, and then Auren, we can move on to yourself. So take it away, man.
Sure. Thanks. So I went to the Texas A&M University. I'm a proud Aggie, and it's not a cult, but it's a great place to spend a few years. I was 4 in and 4 out, so just kind of traditional. And went to a few junior colleges along the way because I couldn't cut it in math class at A&M. So I was strategic in that manner, found some loopholes. But ultimately, I found myself in the business school, had to kind of earn my way in there. I didn't have the grades to get in straight in, so I had to work my way in over the course of about a year and a half. And so once I got into the business school, I ended up majoring in supply chain management. And really liked that field of study. I felt like it was strategic and it fit me well. And throughout that time, had done an internship at Interstate Batteries corporate in Dallas, and enjoyed that. And so that all just kind of led me to I'd like to pursue this when I graduate. I did grow up with a father who was pretty entrepreneurial. He always had multiple things going on, so I kind of had that ingrained in me. And I knew that over time I would like to go that route, but I was really comfortable going into a large company, out of college. And so I had a few different offers and ended up at KPMG, which was, a lot of people know KPMG as accounting, tax, audit, that sort of thing. I was in the consulting practice, so the management consulting practice in strategy and operations. And that kind of fit right in with my supply chain background. And I did that for a few years. And, when I got hired, it's called the Big Four. So you've got Deloitte, PwC, Ernst & Young, and KPMG. And it used to be the Big Eight. And, consolidation happens in every industry. Some people have really big legal problems and shut down. So we got down to 4 main players. And actually, KPMG paid the least at that time out of those 4 companies. But I really love the people, love the culture. And so I came out of school earning just over $50,000 a year. And I was in over $70,000 of debt. And so I know I've got bills, and now I'm paying for everything. I've got rent, and I'm just starting my career. Like I said, it's been about 2 years there starting out. And so when I got to about the 2-year mark, I was like, hey, still have a lot of debt, was being disciplined, and was paying off about $1,000 a month, but I was saying, hey, man, I would love some variable income. What does that look like? And my entrepreneurial wheels are turning, and I'm doing some things on the side, small, but an opportunity came up to where I could do some sales, right? So where I could have a similar fixed income, but then have this variable income opportunity on top of that, and said, let's do that. And I was getting married at the time, which is expensive, which is great. I mean, married is awesome. Big fan. But just there were a lot of new expenses. And so this sales opportunity was enticing, and my relational abilities, it all made sense, even though I had no background in sales. And so I kind of took a risk changing careers. The company took a risk on me, and it's just paid off tremendously. And there were some bad months in there, but overall, my wife had over $40,000 of debt from student debt. I had over $70,000. We also had a car that was over $10,000. So in total, we had about $120,000 of debt. And we are debt free. So that's exciting.
Awesome,
and that took, thank you. And that took a few years of being very disciplined, methodical, saying no to things that we wanted. But at the same time, I mean, I don't want to paint this bleak picture. Like, we had an apartment, we had food, we had things we needed and did a few things we wanted. But overall, just discipline, month after month, focused, and we paid that off. But it was one of the biggest decisions was to pursue that variable income. And I think, and we can talk about this more, but whether that's in a job working for someone else, or you're doing it on the side, or you're doing it for yourself, the ability to generate variable income beyond a fixed income is very important to consider when you are in a significant amount of debt, unless you are making a really large amount of fixed income.
Right. Now, you also have a few kind of entrepreneurial projects on the side, a couple actually. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah. So one of the things I do is called the offer plan. So I actually help college students be prepared for the job market. So it is very competitive. There's a lot of people that end up being underemployed or unemployed who have some good things on their resume. Like, they're not dumb students that wasted their time. I mean, they actually tried, and they're still underemployed or unemployed. And it's a large percentage of students. And then you also have kind of this bottom tier of jobs that, well, I mean, you have a full-time job, but it's still, you're only making 28, 32 grand. And that's, in America, that's still not a lot. It's hard to make a dent in debt. And so I just really like to help people maximize the debt that they go into, or just, the money they're paying, to make the most of that opportunity. And so the offer plan is focused on helping undergraduate college students maximize that experience and that opportunity. And then the other thing I'm working on right now is called STEM. It's a card game that has a companion app, and we're launching that on Kickstarter in the spring. So it's a STEM-based card game, educational. Follow at STEM the game. If you want to go check out Instagram, Twitter, shout out. So
Yeah, awesome. By the way, that game looks sweet. I think I'll be excited to play.
Yeah, I will definitely. I'll have to get both of you test decks.
Yes, that'd be
right on.
So, Auren, let's hear from you, man. What's your story there?
Yeah, so my approach as far as undergraduate was what I would say non-traditional, although it's becoming more popular to go through community college. So I did 2 years at a community college, got all the main classes out of the way. I thought I wanted to go into medical school and working towards that, but decided to pursue nursing because I was hoping to work and finding some meaningful employment with my bachelor's. So ended up doing that, going into a nursing school for 2 years, graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing with only about $4,000 in debt. And part of the reason for that is I actually moved to Yakima, Washington from Sequim, Washington, both rural areas across the state from each other. But I ended up doing that just because the cost of living was so much cheaper in Yakima at Washington State University compared to University of Washington. So I ended up getting through nursing school. I worked as a nurse in mental health for 2 years. Very, very interesting. Decided I wanted to go on to graduate school from the beginning to become a nurse practitioner. So I did that and was able to end up at the University of Washington, where I originally wanted to go from an undergraduate, but I avoided that just because it was, so expensive. So I ended up going into graduate school in 2013 with no debt. I had paid that $4,000 off from my undergrad. I'd also bought a house in the process, a duplex. Was able to rent out the backside, live in one side, virtually, rent-free and covering my mortgage. Went through graduate school, took about 3 years, got my doctorate of nursing practice, degree. Ended up coming out with about $100,000 in debt, $97,000 to be exact. So that's kind of where I stand now. I just graduated in March 2016 this year.
Awesome, man. So, and you're, how much of that are you now paying off? Like, what's I guess your plan to pay that off? What have you put in action there?
Yeah, totally. So it's kind of an interesting situation because some of the loans had some contingencies. I should note too, I was really able to get some great scholarships while I was in graduate school. I got, on average for the 3 years, I got at least $10,000 a year in scholarships. So as far as the plan now, I mean, really the hope and aim is to pay off that $100,000 within 5 years, hopefully more like 2. Interesting situation right now is I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner, so my doctorate was specifically in mental health. I've been working in private practice, so I haven't been really earning my industry potential, which is around $100,000 on average. I've probably been really earning more like $60,000 the last 6 months and building that practice. But again, the earning potential in private practice is anywhere as 100,000 to even 200,000 if you stay real busy. Yep. So it could very easily pay off that 97,000 in debt within a couple of years.
Right. Yeah. So you've obviously got options there. So I mean, both of you guys, obviously very smart people. You guys are very entrepreneurial as well, and smart enough to have. I mean, Stephen, you to be already debt free. And how many years did you mention that took you to reach the debt free point?
Yeah. So about 3.5. I was doing that on my own for about 1.5 to 2 years of that. And then my wife, we got married, and so we've combined, forces, so to speak, and but also combined debts and combined incomes, right. And so the total time across all of that was about 3.5 years.
Okay, yeah, and that obviously just by being frugal and having a smart plan, setting some goals and sticking to that. Now, I think kind of the crux of this conversation, I think, is I would love to hear from both of you guys. And maybe Stephen, you first. For people listening, like, based on your experience, who do you think should go to college and go that route, and who do you think shouldn't? Because obviously, both routes, you can find ways to be successful. Obviously, in your case, and we just heard about that, and then with the many people I've interviewed who. They were able to just start earlier, specifically ones that went through programs like Praxis, where they got apprenticeships at startups, where at like Diana Zitting, for instance, 18-year-old who's a manager at a startup and earning a manager's salary at 18 years old, 0 debt, and so she's starting a lot earlier. There's kind of two paths here, and so I'd be curious to hear, in your opinion, basically who should and who shouldn't. How do they make that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, I get to have a nice little preface of, this can always change depending on the individual. There's so many different scenarios, right? Yeah. But if you really try to outline it, I would say that there are certain fields that still really respect and hold degrees very highly. I don't want to be operated on by an 18-year-old that never went to college, right? Like, I had major surgery last year, and I would really like them to have some credentials behind their name, and from an accredited university that they spent many years learning their craft. But if you're going to create a software application for me, I don't really care. Can you do it or not? So there's I think it is very industry specific, field specific. And then there's some other things you have to realize that are trade-offs. So let's just take someone in a field where you see a lot of people not going to the traditional university, like software development or app development, either way. you do lose some degree of camaraderie, network building experience. There is something to be said for that, and I think that level of value you can extract is dependent upon how much you really invest, in getting value during that 2 or 4 years, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really up to you. They could have gone to university, isolated themselves, learned, and never gotten anything out of their network or professors or anything. Or you could really extract a ton of value out of that. And so that also depends on what sort of campus you go to, right? There's very kind of nomadic campuses that you commute into. University of Texas at Dallas, here in Dallas, was known for that for a long time. They're trying to create more of a campus feel where they're really inviting people to live closer and be more communal, because they realized that there was really a lack of value because it was really kind of a commuter school. So I think it's really up to the individual in certain fields. I think you could still get a lot of value going to school, but it makes sense also for those that choose not to. But there are certain degrees, and you can think law, and you can think medicine. There's others as well. I would even say, some people disagree on this, but education. And so if you are going to educate me, I want you to be educated formally. And so now those things may change over time.
That I know, just to point out, and Auren, I mean, you feel free to jump in here too, because this is just a conversation. But you're mentioning, if they're going to educate you, you want them to be educated. Is there a difference between? Because I remember I took a couple classes in college, and I was taking a marketing class and being educated on marketing from somebody that never run a business, really. They knew all the facts and they were spouting it off, but there was just kind of, their eyes were dead. They didn't really know. They weren't speaking from experience, I guess you could say, versus somebody that's been there, done that. And in my opinion, I'd kind of say there's kind of two categories. Like, I want to learn from somebody that's actually done it and experienced it. And that to me would be really effective learning. But then, and what I think you might also be talking about, there's people that just want to be intellectuals. And I think that college is a great place for somebody that just wants to be an intellectual. They want to know and be able to regurgitate, a lot of stuff. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And ideally, in a place you're paying tens of thousands of dollars, you're getting both of those, right? But the reality is that's not happening. At least in a lot of university settings or certain majors, there's a lack of the experience, the practitioner sort of component. So ideally, you are getting that intellectual piece, but you're also getting the practical piece, right? I had supply chain professors who had their own supply chain consultant businesses and even product kind of in that world, like RFID technology, and they were a professor. So you kind of got both and. But there were also cases where totally lacked the practitioner piece. And so that makes sense that you would say that. And then you have to really, my recommendation if someone's trying to figure that out is do your due diligence, right? If you want to end up in a department for X, mechanical engineering, you can go research that staff. You're going to commit all those thousands of dollars. Know who you're committing those to. Do they really care? What's their background? You can do your, kind of your research or legwork ahead of time. Due diligence is probably the best phrase. But a lot of people don't do that. They don't even know to do that.
Yeah. Now, earlier you mentioned, degrees being kind of required or respected, and I'd add to that required. There's some fields and industries where it's legally required to have a degree or to have gone to school for X amount of time to study this subject. And then there are, I think, industries and different businesses within those industries that when they hire, a degree is still more, respected. And you mentioned, is it KPMG where you work?
Yep, KPMG.
Do you think you would have been able to work there at all without a degree? Do you think there would have been a chance of that?
I don't know anyone that got hired there that didn't, personally. And so I knew a lot of people there. over time, might that change? I think it could, and actually, I think it will. But we're talking many, many years. Present day, I mean, very, very, an extremely small percentage of people, if any, would that be the case currently.
Do you think, is it because it's not necessarily because it's legally required or anything, but just more respected?
I think it's respected, and then they also have to think about who their clients are, and then their clients are looking at, the list of people that they are going to be having work on this project for them, right? So Exxon hires Deloitte, but they're going to see what that team is and who they are and who they're made up of and their pedigree. And you've got a bunch of people that didn't graduate with degrees. There's probably people at Exxon that aren't going to love that.
Right.
But, so that's part of it as well.
So, Auren, how about you, man? What do you think are the factors that people should keep in mind when making that decision?
No, I totally agree with nearly everything Stephen said, in the sense of, obviously, you go to a doctor. I'm a mental health clinician. People want to see those credentials. When you're getting operated on, you do want somebody who's been through a residency, has that medical school background. But also at the end of the day, it's interesting because success in many ways nowadays is equated with it. There are some good statistics on that, on those who finish college, who have a college degree, have a higher earning potential. In fact, those families, a lot of them even have even better health outcomes. But we're also in an age where you can achieve excellence through other means. And you guys had talked about driving in Texas, and Stephen saying, Texans call it driving on purpose. Well, my whole big thing is, if you're going to be going into education, do it on purpose. And one of the things I would challenge everyone to do, that I did it was about a year into my graduate school education, where I literally broke down what each class was costing me, and sharing that with you right now. I mean, tuition at University of Washington is actually on the cheaper side for graduate school. I was paying around $25,000 per year. That's 3 academic quarters. So if we break that down, total cost per credit is almost $800. So say for a 5-credit course, 1 academic hour, 50 minutes, was costing me $385. So you guys talk about wanting to have professors who've had experience, have that field knowledge. I think that's key, because that's going to enable you to see that outlook for your forward trajectory on whatever it is you're getting yourself involved in. Fortunately, I was very fortunate to have professors who were in private practice, or who had very interesting experiences, where sometimes literally the whole academic hour, that's really all we kind of talked about, was their various case-by-case experiences that were real-life practical examples. And that is priceless. Nowadays, you can definitely accomplish that through other means. I mean, if you're, whatever industry you want to get into is, if you're limited by not having a certification, then obviously you probably need to get the education. But if you think about that, you're paying $385, at least I was, per academic hour. If I was studying something like English or drama, or the whole host of other degrees under the sun that have no end certification that you're going after, I would have probably said, hey, I could go to a conference, and probably get a similar, if not better, education and experience. So you guys hit the nail on the head, I think, as far as what kind of experience are you getting from the education? Because on the flip side, there's also those who really enjoy collegiate sports. Maybe they even have a scholarship, and that's what they're going after. And I mean, you probably can't get that outside of college. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, I think you got to figure out what is your purpose in going to school. And I challenge everyone again to figure out, hey, how much is each class costing you, and is it worth it to me?
That's really interesting, man. Appreciate that breakdown there. And
that's really fascinating.
And Stephen, something you said, earlier about kind of the the company you work for and the companies your company works with, they tend to look at I don't know. There's this thing called the signaling theory, and I guess the simplest version of it is that a college degree is like a signal to the world, right? When you go to get a job, it's an indication that you've stuck with something long enough to finish it. I mean, if I had to boil it down to its simplest kind of purpose, I'd say that's what it is. It's so somebody can look at you and be like, you've accomplished something. And because a lot of the time too, what you get is, it doesn't, at least like when I've hired people, it doesn't necessarily, just because they studied that subject in school doesn't necessarily mean they know what it takes to, in a real world situation, to get the job done. So I find more often than not, it's this signal. And what's interesting is that, Auren, like you said, in this day and age, it's getting easier and easier to create different signals, whether that's a podcast or a blog, or maybe a business, some sort of entrepreneurial venture you've started, where people can look at that, and it's this tangible thing you've already done, you've created. But I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, it's in the offer plan, a few things that we talk about is, if you go to college, the things that you really need to exhibit by the time you're done are that you've learned how to learn, because it's very unlikely, there's very few fields where you learned exactly what you need to know at university. You walk into a job and you're just perfect, right? I mean,
Right.
You know exactly what to do. You typically have to learn more. So you learn how to learn. You learn longevity, like you talked about, finishing something, and a commitment, kind of all those things, all in that same vein. And also within within college, ideally you're involved in some things on campus, and you don't bounce around, just like you don't job hop. So you've showed loyalty. So there's these things that you can show that you've modeled throughout that 2 to 4 or 5 year period, that someone's going to say, hey, you know what? You're the type of person that we are willing to extend full benefits to, $65,000 a year. We're going to train you, and we're willing to invest in you because you've shown these things, right? Mm-hmm. And that's those are some of those signals that if you're going to choose to spend the money to go to college, you need to be, kind of showing off, so to speak. But can you do those same things without going to college? Absolutely, you can, and especially you can do that in fields that are willing to listen to signals that are coming from other places outside of a university setting. I now work for a healthcare software company. We have multiple people that have not completed a college degree, and they're really talented. They're great. They're some of our best employees, and they found other ways to show that, right, that they were capable of doing that job with excellence. And so, again, I think, like I said at the very beginning with a big preface, is very scenario specific currently.
Now, you mentioned learning how to learn, and I would also add that, to me, that skill is very similar, or the same thing as just learning how to be innovative, to think outside of the box, to basically not just do what you're told, or memorize the facts and just regurgitate, because obviously that's an extremely beneficial skill when you get in the real world. It's not, once you're out of that college pipeline, people aren't going to be telling you what to do next and laying it out to you, or laying it out nicely for you and stuff, and you're going to have to get a little more innovative, learn how to kind of adapt. I guess, what would be your guys' advice on how to do that in college? Because I find that it can be very difficult. I mean, when you're growing up in this system where there's an answer key to every test, and all you have to do is find the right answer, and you're working for that letter grade, and you're competing with your other classmates within this very kind of closed box and system. It's really hard for people to break out and start thinking creatively. And the ones that do end up being the entrepreneurs. They end up being the ones that maybe start their own business and eventually drop out. But what do you think is the best way to start to foster that mindset?
Well, I just got to say, I grew up in New Jersey for most of my life on the East Coast and attended public school. And then I moved out to Washington just turned 17, and it was kind of a different landscape because now I got exposed to I think there's definitely more of a culture, more concentrated on the West Coast of homeschoolers. In fact, my wife is a homeschooler, or was, right? She's a product of that. So, Kylan, when you talk about the system, I mean, I know for me, in regurgitating information, that was a huge problem in high school, especially in just trying to get the grade, just get through the class. And then I actually ended up taking advantage of a program called Running Start, where I was able to attend the community college my senior year. But you enter in college, and it's that same phenomenon where you're just sort of regurgitating information on some level. And I think where things get separated is when you do have those professors who have that real world, real life experience. And I think what you got to do with everyone is, and if you have kids and you're listening to this, is you got to challenge your kids to take advantage of those opportunities, or you have to take advantage of opportunities yourself. And in many ways, people going to college are trying to do that, but we get stuck in that pattern of thinking where we're just here to pass a test, right? Well, at the end of the day, life is about a lot of little tests, but like you said, Con, it's not just about A, B, C, D, or E, right? The problems are a lot more complex. They're constantly changing. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I learned within myself and breaking that system that I was kind of conditioned for was, man, I had to wake up and just start to take advantage of opportunities and pushing myself and, I'm sort of stepping out of that path off the cliff as a lemming because I was there.
I think back to my university experience, and what you're saying really resonates with me. And I think about, I'm just starting to list out in my mind. I can think of 5 classes right off the top that it was regurgitation. That's what it was. And is there discipline to be learned in some of that? To some degree, sure. But that's maybe one of the only real wins I could extract from that, right? It's just discipline. But I really looked forward more so to the classes that were project-based, that were case study-based, that we traveled off campus to go learn and experience things. And I went to a supply chain conference my senior year in San Diego, and those sorts of things are what I really look forward to. And so, if there's any universities out there listening, that's the thing you got to capture, right? And that's the thing you have to replicate over and over throughout each class. But there's certain types of classes that really lend themselves to this regurgitation model, and it's not really helpful. And so, I really identify with what you're saying.
Yeah, and even for any students out there listening, I think that this is just something to be mindful of, that if you are in this school system, this is something that very well could be affecting you in possibly a negative way. And, I know specifically for you, Stephen, obviously for me and Auren, I think, some people you came into contact with later on in life, we were fortunate enough to be surrounded by the kind of people that did push us, to see things with a more entrepreneurial perspective. But not everybody has that. And really kind of in 2016 beyond, especially in like the startup community and stuff like that. And I was just, the interview I had just an hour ago, we were talking about this. Things have become so much more fast-paced and fluid, in just with the way technology and how much information is just readily available and how fast things can just be now. Like, I was talking, to this guy, we were talking about instant gratification and how growing up that was kind of a negative thing. Like, beware that you're not just trying to get some instant gratification, like good things take time and all this stuff. When now I think it's like it's the norm. I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't even think we should use the term instant gratification anymore. Like, it's the way that the world is. I mean, you can order a ride, Uber, and in the press of a button, you can order food instantly, especially if you live in the city. And that's the world that these college students are stepping into. And and it's a world where you're required to think more on your feet, to think outside of the box, to be creative, and to figure out how to provide value independently and be self-directed. And the fact is that our education system hasn't changed for like 150 years. And there are some of those outliers, those outlying universities and stuff and programs that are making steps to amend that, but they're often really slow, and that just takes a lot of time. And so, yeah, just if you're listening, it's just something to be aware of that is the case. And it seems like a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, I'm realizing the value of beginning with the end in mind. I would say in high school, you should start thinking about your college experience, what that might be like, and if you want to go, if you don't want to go, and ultimately what you want to do with your life, what you're interested in. And I'm curious, like Stephen, did you kind of put a lot of thought into that before you went to college, or was it one of those things where you kind of figured it out as you went?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the scary thing now is not even when you're in high school, should you think about college? It's when you're in middle school, should you think about high school? Or when you're a freshman, should you be thinking about, your last 2 or 3 years? Because, I'm familiar with a few just like rock star kids in Dallas that are 16 doing, full-time internships in technology, and they're living in the Bay Area, and they're going up to MIT for the summer, and they had to prepare at 13, 14, and 15 to be able to do that at 16 and 17. And so it's not just the 18-year-old, the 17-year-old preparing for college. It's people doing that years earlier even, right? And those are maybe some outliers that are really special, just really forward-thinking. And one of those guys is I really consider a good friend. He's brilliant. He's 17, and his dad's a VP in high technology, and so he grew up around that mentality. But really, I do think it's wise. And I did do that in high school. I was thinking about what do I want to do in college, and being proactive and thinking about that. And I really did intend to go into business, and that's what I ended up doing. But the reality is, once you step foot on a campus, that all can change. I had people that had every intention to be that finance major, and they ended up in being a chemistry major or pre-med or whatever it might be. And so it is good to prepare, but I think it's also, you have to be careful to not be so locked in that you don't allow yourself to dream and don't allow yourself to develop. And, the other piece that I really want to make sure to communicate is that, especially for people that are not yet at college or considering going to college or just maybe in the front half of college, is that you really don't want to make the mistake of investing all that time, energy, and money into something that will just not deliver a return. Even if you love art, art history, or even if you love, whatever, you can go down the list, right? Just statistically speaking, of poor choices in majors. And there's things you shouldn't do if you want to get a legitimate return on your investment. There's always outliers. But being thoughtful about what you want to major in, but being thoughtful about what does that mean? Like you said, having the end in mind. I had friends I'm just looking at like, man, I don't know how that's going to end up for you, because you're sinking yourself in debt, and it's going to be a harsh reality when you get out looking at the market for your major. So, yeah, that'd be my response.
I love what you said about the investment factor, looking at college as an investment. I feel like most people look at it as a necessity. It's just the next step. Like, I won't be able to get a good job if I don't go to college. And that's just, it's not the case anymore. If you want to get a good job and not go to college, there's plenty of good jobs out there. I mean, heck, Google's hiring 19-year-olds straight out of, high school because they've created some cool apps and they've already started providing value to the world. So starting to think of college as an investment, and what do you do before you make an investment? You research what you're investing in. You look at the viability of it, the longevity, and your opportunity cost if you do throw your money into this. What are you missing out on because you're putting your time and effort and resources into this option? And so I think just being really mindful of that is a really valuable thing going into it. And so, Auren, from you, how premeditated was your path through college?
Oh yeah, my path through college was extremely well planned out. I mean, I knew in community college what I wanted to do. That's why I went the nursing route with my bachelor's, because I was confident I could get through it with as little debt as possible, and then move on to become a mid-level provider. And I've been really happy with that, and happy with the choices that I've made, and I wouldn't have done it any differently other than maybe trying to not accrue as much debt and potentially taking advantage of other scholarships. But what I will say, and one of the things that I did before I even entered into my program, was I had what we call a crucial conversation with some of the program leads, in which I sent them some emails and I had some correspondence back and forth. And, if you're considering going into college, or even if you're in college and you think you want to change your major, you want to get into a particular school, I think it's best if you can go and actually talk to the professors or talk to the program lead. One of the things that happens, this happens a lot in community college, where you get an advisor where they might not necessarily be a good fit for you, and you kind of get stuck in maybe following some of those recommendations that potentially you should think more critically about. So with that, I just encourage anyone out there, if you are in school, find your own advisors. Just because somebody is your academic advisor doesn't really, necessarily mean much, in that you can ask, whoever you want for advice on that. And another thing I would, encourage people to do is to go up to those, program leads in whatever program you're considering, and, ask them how they got to where they're at. How did they become a professor? How did they get into teaching? I've known some professors who are retired and are just teaching for fun, and they have been some of the best professors out there. Really enjoyed taking classes from them, because they have all that experience, with the career. And the other thing too, and talking with them, is asking them, hey, what's been the worst part of your journey with this degree or getting here, and then what's been the best part? That's another thing that I encourage people to ask when they're applying for a job. A lot of times, you might catch whoever it is you're talking to and catch them off guard, but it's a great question to ask. What is the worst thing about this company? What is the best thing? What do you most enjoy? What is the worst thing about this school? What is the best thing? And those are questions that don't often get asked, but you open up a world of opportunity with someone when you show them that kind of interest, and they're going to tell you the bad, the good, the ugly, and everything in between.
Yeah, that's a great point. Getting close to the end of our time here, but before we end, I want to ask both of you guys two questions, and just kind of get you to share some parting advice for our listeners. So we'll start with you, Stephen. I'd love some brief advice for you, for someone, and just act like you're speaking to them, for someone who is in the college pipeline and they know that's what they want to do, right? They don't really have a huge interest in finding an alternative route. They're in the college pipeline. Some brief advice for them on how to make the most of that experience.
So, like we've talked about so far a lot, do your research, right? Do your homework. It's really an investment in yourself, right? And so you should not just make assumptions, right? We talk a lot about assume-a-side. So don't make assumptions that end up hurting you. Yeah. And so I think you really need to dig into, okay, and kind of like what Auren was saying too, what does this mean, right? If I play this out 5-10 years down the line, where am I headed in a career if I get this degree, right? And so when you're processing all that, in order to set yourself up for success, right, it's a few kind of key things. One, do I want to do this, right? I mean, you should kind of avoid some things that are just, we talked about that earlier. I joked about art history. I don't know the stat. Do your homework about, what are things you really should avoid, right? So now this is kind of the pool of things that might be a good idea. Don't select the ones that you will absolutely hate your life, right? If you and numbers just don't get along, you being an accounting major probably isn't a win. Okay, so we might want to avoid that. You want to find something where do you want to do the job, and you talk to practitioners, you talk to professors, family, friends, things like that. Okay, that sounds interesting. That sounds engaging. I could see myself doing that, right? And then it's also looking at, okay, I'm already at this college, or I'm thinking about going to this college, and I'm looking at the different schools, engineering, business, whatever it might be, and what's the pedigree of these different people I'm going to be learning from, subjecting myself to hour after hour, week after week for a few years. And so it really comes down to you taking ownership of this investment you're making in yourself, for a lifetime, ultimately. So,
yeah. Auren, do you have anything that you'd want to add to that?
Well, just from experience, the big three questions for me, and the first one being, why are you where you are at, right? Especially if you're in college. Why are you there? I mean, even if you're in business, why am I here doing what I'm doing right now? And then next, especially with college, what is it costing me, right? For some people, it's time. A lot of times we think about the financial cost, and encourage you, look at your tuition statement, figure out what each class is costing you, okay? And then the next thing you got to ask yourself, okay, does my why justify the cost? Because if it does not, it's costing you too much, and you might want to reconsider. And then lastly, the crucial conversations. If your why does not justify your cost, you should have those crucial conversations with your professors and whoever else, and letting them know that you're thinking about, dropping out of the program for whatever reason until you can really justify your why. And also asking them what the future potential of whatever it is you're studying is. Because that needs to be a huge part of your why, I believe, while you're in school. Because people are getting out of school with $100,000 in debt. 5 years later, 10 years later, they're not able to buy a house. I can tell you this. I bought a house pretty young, and it's been one of my best investments. And if you do not have a why that justifies the cost, you're going to be setting yourself up for heartache later in life.
Yeah. And I just want to add something to that, too, is that the sunk cost fallacy. If you're listening to this and you are already maybe a few years into your college experience and you're thinking, man, this investment isn't worth it, just beware of that sunk cost fallacy, which is that, you have the feeling that just because you put X amount of money already into something, you have to just see it through. And that's a fallacy. It's something you can Google, but beware of that. If it's really something, think about your opportunity cost. If it's really something that's costing you a greater opportunity somewhere else, then your best bet is to just stop, or you could possibly regret it later. And now, Stephen, for you, just the second and probably final question here, because I know we got to go. You have quite a bit of entrepreneurial experience as well. You've kind of seen the best of both worlds, what it's like to succeed kind of in the system and succeed in a more entrepreneurial sense outside of that. For anybody listening who's really just kind of unhappy with college and looking for an alternative, I guess what would be your advice to kind of start down an entrepreneurial path, say to come up with a business idea and maybe work on that while they're still in college or something like that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because even if you never really fully realize some massive gain from doing something entrepreneurial, there's so much learning to be had and kind of cross-training that you can glean, from doing that. And so if you're going to go start a business, right, there's a few different things you could think about. Is someone doing something and they're doing a really bad job at it, right? Are they doing something and I know I could do that better? And so you're going to go improve upon their mess. that they've made, right? You can do that. People do that all day long, and there's a lot of examples of successful companies today that were not the first mover, right? The other thing you can think about is is there some sort of pain point, right? In my life, there's a few people that I've read on. They like doing kind of like the daily journal, where you just go about your day and you say, okay, it's 7 a.m. I woke up, and every single thing you do throughout a day, you're recording your pain points. You're recording the things that are frustrating, where you have problems, where you have needs. And businesses can, be born out of that sort of concept, right? That sort of practice. But ultimately, I would nearly always recommend you try something because there's so much you can learn. And there's so many things you can do that are not, they're not going to break the bank. They're really affordable. Online businesses especially, where the costs are so low to begin, and you can just learn. And again, those are the types of things that you can reach out to other people and learn from them. And so I would definitely recommend that you try something. Maybe take time to process through what that would be, but the benefit of what you'll learn in just attempting, even if you fail beautifully, you will learn so much. You'll look back on it and say, that was totally worth the X dollars I spent, the X hours I spent, because I gained X, Y, and Z. And I would be shocked if that wasn't the case, when you look backwards on that.
Well, successful dropouts, you've been hanging out with Stephen, Auren, and Kylan, learning what it takes to succeed. For everything we talked about today, head over to successfuldropout.com. And remember, stay hungry, stay foolish.